when did you get started in railroading?
Pete, I think I got started when I was about 8 years old, when they being my parents, finally allowed me to go away a ways on my bike. Not that this wasn't a different world back then, but I started riding up to the Central Railroad in New Jersey tracks. We still had commuter service here in Flemington. Steam, incidentally. Before, when I'd been in grade school, I would ride my bike up to this crossing, ditch the bike in the ditch, get on the train because they would stop at the crossing, the paved crossing making a great station platform, let passengers off, I'd get on. I knew the conductor, the engineer, and the fireman, brakeman training very well. So I would start turning over the seats. That was the first thing that had to be done for the next morning routine, going the other way. By that time we'd gotten to the Main Street station, and I could never figure it out until later, but they would always encourage me, the railroad guys would encourage me to stay and help wherever I could. I didn't figure it out until I was quite a bit older that every evening that I stayed to help them, that meant one of those guys could go home early. So it was a great time. I'd ride the train with this crew up and into the yard, and they'd do their switch around. We'd put the engine on the turntable, turn it, water it, bank up the fire for the night and get it all ready. All of these things I learned to do over the years. And I think at that particular time I felt really like king of the hill, because I could put that camelback steam locomotive on the turntable and get it balanced perfectly, which you had to do. It was a hand-powered turntable. It took a guy on each corner, 4 guys. Additionally, the Lehigh Valley Railroad was still running passenger service on their main line, which is about 2 miles from this house. We had a branch in Flemington that was served by a doodlebug, a gas-electric car, which was still gas. And my parents had bought me a signet ring that had my initials on it. And I got to wandering down around the Lehigh Valley tracks as well as the Central. And I got to know the conductor on the doodlebug down there, and he said, "Well, hell, kid," he says, "that ring is your pass. It's got your initials on it, and it happens to be the same initials as this railroad. So that's good enough for a pass for you. You want to ride back and forth out to the junction with us, you can, whenever you want to."
That's nice.
So it wasn't too long before I made friends with the engineer on that job. He was never brave enough to let me sit in the seat and run the gas car to the junction at age 12 or 13. But I could sit on his lap and run it out to the junction. That was okay, because I guess he could have thrown me the heck out of the way if anything happened, and there would have been no problem or whatever. So we got to know about doodlebugs fairly early, and certainly knew how to run and fire, to some degree, a steam engine. So actually, from then on, Pete, I guess I got interested in cars. I got old enough to drive and kind of forgot about the railroading quite a bit, and was cars and women then. And the next time there was any railroad really in my life was when I was home one weekend, my father having passed away. I was home, and of all things I was doing, I was painting a weather vane on a cupola on our garage roof. And I heard a steam locomotive whistle, and it was close. And I thought, what could this be? You know, the year was 1964, and I was in the 3rd or 4th year term in the Navy. I scrambled down off the roof and went Went driving up to the end of town that I heard the whistle come from. Lo and behold, there's a string of wooden passenger equipment. Before the day was out, I had met everybody that was in the formative years of what was to become Black River and Western Railroad. So then I got involved when I got out of the Navy later that year. I immediately went and signed up at Black River. At the time, they only had 2 licensed, because they did need to be in New Jersey at that time, steam engineers. Just simply because it was a boiler and it was a pretty high pressure as far as steam was concerned. And even though it was classified a portable boiler, you still needed, it was called Black Seal In Charge License, I think was what it was called. At any rate, those of us that were active at that time had to get it. And we were taught railroading thoroughly. Those fellows on Central and on the Lehigh Valley, if you did something wrong, they were going to tell you about it, even if it meant maybe you weren't going to come back again, if they really ticked you off. And they wouldn't be able to have your help or your assistance or whatever like that. But there was no, like I noticed today, that everybody's got to be treated with kid gloves. I was not treated with kid gloves around the railroad. If I did something wrong, I heard about it in no uncertain terms, that you weren't going to make that mistake again. And it was always, always headed in the direction of safety. And we passed rules exams done by a rules examiner from the Pennsylvania Railroad, which still owned that branch into Flemington. We just leased it. When we wanted to operate on that railroad, in the infancy that things were, because we were a fairly early short line, or a hoot toot, as we used to call them. But in our case, we would have to get a train order from the Pennsylvania Railroad every morning to put the Flemington running track out of service for the Pennsylvania Railroad and in service for Black River and Western Railroad, using locomotives number blah blah and blah blah, whatever. And the order would be issued to run till a certain time. And boy, there were a few occasions on Friday nights when we would sneak a locomotive out to do some work or getting cars ready for the next day or whatever. And I had some close calls with the Pennsylvania Railroad freight crew. And there was no uncertain terms there, you were told, too. You get that engine back in that switchboard and get it closed up because you don't belong out here. Or show me your train order. And of course, we didn't have one for them. So we would go to all kinds of ruses, like putting popsicle sticks in the joint in the rail in front of the station at Ringo's when we'd go to dinner, knowing that we needed to get an engine out and do some work. And well, depending on which way the popsicle stick was laid over on the rail when we got back, we could tell whether the Pennsylvania Railroad freight drill had been up and back, or whether it was up and hadn't come back, or what the situation was. So we had ourselves pretty well covered that way. It was illegal, but nonetheless. And then finally we bought the railroad. That was one man with a very large bankroll that actually wandered around Philadelphia, general offices of the railroad, for several days, he told me, with a check for $186,000 in his pocket, looking for somebody that would take the money to buy the Flemington branch in Flemington in the name of Black River and Western. So I had a good career at Black River Railroad. Like I said, I started as in the tourist end of it as locomotive engineer, conductor on the school trains, got farmed out as an engineer over to the New Hope and Ivyland Railroad. I was lucky enough at New Hope and Ivyland Railroad to be an engineer that ran a steam mixed train for a couple of summers. We would take the steam engine and freight with 1 or 2 passenger cars on the back end to the other end of the line, leaving New Hope at about 6:30 and getting back about midnight or so. And that was one of the greatest things I remember in this whole career, if you will, was running those steam mixed trains at night. I have one little anecdote from those night freight trips. Here I am this one evening with a particularly fresh green crew of volunteers. We're in the yard at Ivyland. It gets dark. The boys bring their railroad lanterns out. And everybody had decided that they were going to, don't ask me why, everybody had decided that they were going to put a blinking bulb in their railroad hand lamp. So I'm looking down the tracks around 14 freight cars or so, and I'm seeing what looks like the dance of the fireflies down there with these kids running around with lamps that are blinking. And one's giving me a go-ahead, the other one's giving me what looked like a backup, and I said, look, this is not going to happen. Well, we don't have any regular bulbs in these hand lamps now. And I said, well, we're going to get one out of my hand lamp. I've got one, and the rest of you are just going to keep your lamps down to the ground and give no signals whatsoever. I've got to get it down to one person giving me signals for safety reasons.
Sure.
So we did, and it was okay. But they didn't have, New Hope and Ivyland Railroad at that time didn't have near the safety regulations, and were not enforcing them to near the degree that they were at Black River.
I guess New Hope and Ivyland has since changed theirs.
Oh yes, yes. Other management came into New Hope and Ivyland over the years, and I got pretty disinterested in it over there, and pulled my pawns all black over to Black River again, and stayed put there until I got involved with Phillipsburg for a museum effort. I worked at Black River for 2 years as passenger train master after one of the owners of the railroad had gotten into some disagreements with other owners and had retired, I guess that was the word for it. And so I was involved in working for the railroad, and the only thing I can say on that is all those professional railroaders said, kid, don't try and turn it into a job. If you love it as a hobby, stay with it as a hobby. Don't try and turn it into a job. You'll be the sorriest person alive. I'm saying, they're crazy. They're out of their mind. The only thing I want is, at this point in my life, then, I want a financial interest in a railroad where I can really feel like I'm working to do something for the good of the corporation, not just a volunteer, quote unquote. Well, I can say after working for 2 years for Black River and Western, those fellows were right. I damn near lost it as a hobby. It was just too much.
How'd you get involved with high iron?
High iron was a pretty easy move. One of our volunteers in the early days of Black River was Ross Rowland, Jr. And when he got this German of idea in his head that he wanted to run some long trip steam-powered passenger trains, it was a natural. He came after some of the volunteers at Black River to help him. That was when I discovered that if you want to play the railroading game, you've got to have another source of money. Ross was, in those early formative years of high iron, was a champion moneymaker in the commodities market in New York. all of us put our pennies together in High Iron in the beginning and created a trading fund, which he managed for us on a daily basis in New York. And it was at the period of time when silver was just going nuts. And we made money hand over fist. Made money hand over fist, culminating with High Iron Company and running a steam-powered trip to 100th anniversary of the driving of the Gold Spike at Promontory, Utah. We took the, as us inside people called it, the long blue tube, the 18-car train, all painted alike, to Salt Lake City, Utah. The steam engine as far as Kansas City, and back again. So I got to work as Chief Mechanical Officer for High Iron, and I should say that that was not engine as much as it was cars. I did some things electrical on our steam engines, because that's always been my forte. But my forte at High Iron was taking care of the cars themselves. I had to learn about electrical systems in railroad cars real quick. It had been all pretty simple stuff at Black River because they were virtually wooden cars from the days when kerosene lamps and oil lamps were the electricity, so to speak. High Iron was a lot of fun. We did a lot of trips. I got to places that I would have never, ever, ever got to, Promontory, Utah being one of them. And I had the Gold Spike, in my hot little hand for about a minute and a half. Looking back on it, it was foolish, but sometimes Ross Rowland liked to be over the top, is the word that I guess is used today to describe it. And in our case, we got a brand new Bethlehem steel spike that I found along the Lehigh Valley Railroad. We had it gold plated, and we had it engraved with everything that was on the original Gold Spike from 1869. And for our tail car on the Gold Spike Centennial Limited, our train, for our tail car, I bought a safe for the company, and in the safe was this Gold Spike. And we took it to Promontory, Utah with us. There was only one thing that went wrong with this whole thing. The size of the spikes in 1869 were quite a bit different than they were in 1969. So we get out there with this gigantic Today railroad spike, and they bring out the real railroad spike, which was about this long in gold, and the polished laurel tie that had been put back in the exact spot, supposedly, to drop this original Gold Spike in that was hooked to telegraph wires, just like originally. There was only one trouble: when we came to recreate it with our Gold Spike, it wouldn't fit the hole that they drilled in the tie. So that was kind of a bust. But that was definitely a high point also in my railroad rail fan career, was the Gold Spike and having the Gold Spike in my hand and whatever like that. We did, we, the High Iron Company, came home from that trip in debt a little bit over $1 million. The trip was designed to hold about 500 people, and I think we took less than 100. And plus Ross was, and I would imagine still is, a pretty big spender when he does things. Everything goes first class, and certainly nothing wrong with that, but you do have to pay the bills at some point. So we had to hustle pretty well when we came back and run a whole bunch of local trips to get ourselves out of debt, which we did. And then it was legislation and railroad management and consolidation and buyouts were starting to happen, and we were having trouble. It wasn't like the first trip we ran in 1967, where we rented the Central Railroad in New Jersey for $1,000 for the day and went to Jim Thorpe. When I think back of one trip coming home, I probably shouldn't even be saying this today, but we uncoupled the rear car off a train at about 70 miles an hour. The engineer, Charlie Strunk, our regular high iron engineer, was running the train in this last leg of it coming home. And he said, I was in the cab, just riding at the time. And he said, holy, He yanked the throttle open all the way on the 759 and overcame all the sliding wheels on that train, because our train was dumped in emergency, to pull himself far enough away so that that last car wasn't going to come up and smack. That is the time when something like that happens. You separate the hoot-toot engineers from the professionals that probably had never had that happen in a 50-year career, but knew what to do. No thinking about it. Knew what to do in an instant and did it. But they were great days, and they were all great trips.
Did you know George Hart?
Oh yes, George, one of my favorite people. Yeah. I met George when we bought a second steam locomotive in we actually leased it from him, lease purchased from him, an 060 Brooklyn District Terminal, well-fired saddle tank steamer. We bought it from him in York and moved it to Black River Railroad on its own wheels in tow. The train that locomotive didn't work for us at Black River. We used it one season, and then it was the wrong thing. If there'd been anybody there that would have been listening to the railroad people, George Hart amongst them, even though it was his locomotive that he was trying to not get rid of, but put into service with us. They felt that this thing couldn't build enough steam to go 6 miles at a trip uphill, which is Flemington to Ringo's. And it wouldn't. I was the only one that ran it for its year that it was in service, because everybody else was scared of it. I learned very quickly that oil-fired locomotives did strange things. Come in. I feel real good about the fact that I removed the builder's plates from that locomotive, cleaned them up 100%, and I took them up to George one day in Jim Thorpe, and I said, here's the builder's plates off of the 14 down at Ringo. Sooner or later, somebody's going to come by and get them, and I wanted you to have them. And he was so pleased that I had done that and brought them back. George's a great person. Great person.
So tell us the story about the beginning of the railroad stories.
Well, I got a renewed acquaintance with Pete Terp at a rally that we went to in Trenton for the museum. I forget what the occasion was that particular time, but he says, why don't you throw in with us at Phillipsburg? And I'm thinking of starting a club up there, and what do you think? And well, we talked, we got some other people involved, and Pete knew just who he apparently had been thinking about this for quite a while, because he had the names all pretty well figured out in his head. He just needed to contact them and pull them in. And we in fact started, and I thought, this is wonderful. This is a fresh group of new people. Some of them seasoned railroaders, some of them still vigorous rail fans. I'd included myself in that category at that point in time. And here we got a new club going, and what more natural of a place for the museum? I had felt that for a long time, but Phillipsburg wasn't signing my paychecks. Black River was. So we started thinking about that, and I think Pete had just the right idea when he started the historians with an idea of telling the railroad history of the railroads in Phillipsburg, but at the same time we're off in a corner still boosting the museum for whatever we can, but we're going to go on and do something of our own. It's been a wonderful thing the club has. I'm just sorry we weren't able to do more with the restoration of the historic railroad equipment that we've got. We got it, but we haven't been able to do much with it, and that's my only sorriness. We've done a lot with the Centennial and Southwestern, and it's nice, but as Pete Terp said to me right after we got it one time, and I think this is classic Pete. This is classic Pete. He's shaking his finger at me. He says, "I know what's the matter with you, Rocky." He says, "It's not 1 foot to 1 foot gauge. So you're not really interested in it, are you?" And I said, "No, Pete, you're absolutely right. It's nice, it's cute, but doesn't quite do it for me. I can appreciate what Henry Becker did for the world with this train set, but it's not for me. I want to be able to climb on it, not sit on it." So my goal, of course, up there at this point, with Andrew King, one of the younger members of the club, that is sort of my arms and legs. Railroad signaling has always been my forte, and that's been the interest point to me. That and steam locomotives. Phillipsburg, less than a mile from our museum building, is the site of the first automatic electric railway signal in the world, Black Dan's Cut. I have the complete signal that replaced it in my collection at Ringo's. And over the years, I've collected just about the entire interior from the tower, BU Tower. Why? Because it was available. I certainly hope, before I die, that the guts can get put back into that tower again and have it look like something. It's started. The town apparently has some money to do something, but not enough money, I'll have to say. By a long shot, not enough money. I don't know how much time I got left. Who knows? Nobody knows how much time I got left. But I'm certainly hoping. But in the meantime, getting back to the germ of the idea again, Andrew King and I are building a railroad signal for the front of the museum. Something that can be around, and it will operate when it's done. It certainly will operate.
That'll be neat.
So it'll be great. Hopefully, I have all the stuff to do it. It'll be almost a duplicate of the signal that exists right outside my house here that I did about 30 years ago. So there is a little bit of background there still left in the head of how to do it. It's just a matter of where to get the stuff at this point in time. By all means, I'll show you the interlocking machine in the basement, the only one of those in captivity that I know of in the United States. That came from the Lehigh Valley Railroad at Union Street, Allentown, Pennsylvania. My buddy and I bought that for $75 from the Lehigh Valley Railroad. I still got the sales order. $75 as is, where is, buyer to remove. 4.5 tons later, in a Ryder truck, in little pieces. It was sitting in the backyard in Flemington. A day later, it was in the basement. And a year later, with me looking very pasty-faced because I hadn't been out in the sun much, the interlocking machine was back together, all 4.5 tons of it, in my basement. The whole idea of an interlocking machine is to prevent two trains from running into each other. And that is done by either mechanical means or electrical means or both. This is known as an electromechanical machine. Most of the locking is removed from this machine although I have every bit of it, for its purposes now, because I can't clean the levers properly without being able to move them, and without it being hooked up to a railroad, they're impossible to move when the mechanical locking's hooked up. So there's some locking in the machine. There's one piece of locking that can be demonstrated between levers, and we'll do that now. We're going to set our lever back to stop here. The semaphore blade is going to fall to stop from its approach or 45 position. At that time, there'll be the sound of the machine speeding up. The current will come back into the machine, pick up the lever underneath this lever, and allow me to push the lever back in, which effectively releases the locking in here. And if this were hooked up properly, the light would then come back on. In this case, the light means, for purposes of this machine, that the signal is pulled up. The light's going to go out right away as soon as we get back to stop. So here we go. We're setting back to stop. Blade's starting to fall. Blade's all the way down. The machine is winding up. There it generated its current, made its click, and the last part, the lever can be moved in the rest of its way. Blacks are switch machines, and the two blue ones on the end are known as traffic levers, which set the direction of traffic and set up the electrical circuit so that trains can run either way on one track. Those are code transmitters that break up steady DC current into pulses of 5 per minute, 120 per minute, or 180 per minute. These are superimposed out on the track in cab signal territory, and whichever one of these is running tells what the indication is that the man gets in the cab, of what the wayside signal is, what it's at.
Okay.
And the absence of any signal at all for safety, the absence of any of them, which would be the fourth one, if you will, is no code. Mm-hmm. So that's signal at stop.
Yeah.
And that's what he gets in his cab. Yeah.
Is this in use anywhere anymore? Or?
Yes. Yes, those are still in use on the Pennsylvania Railroad. There were two different types. This was the wayside type that was used, wayside signal cases. And this one right here is known as a coffee grinder. And it's got all 3 of the codes in it. 20 years ago and before, if you went into a Pennsylvania Railroad tower anywhere on the main line, in the electrified zone, and here are 3 or 4 of these running down in the bottom, sending out the code from the tower out to the first signals. Coffee grinder. Since then, I've also restored a somewhat later, but not much later, very early Pennsylvania Railroad CTC machine, CTC type machine, and a bunch of various other stuff. I've kept busy with that railroad signaling end of it all through my career of doing the railroading. And of course, as I mentioned to you before, I took care of all the grade crossing signals on Black River Railroad for more than 20 years. And never charged them a cent. They gave me space to store my stuff, for hopefully that'll be for the museum or something useful, and I did the work for them. It's been a lot of fun. The road has been long and tortuous in some cases, but it's been a lot of fun so far, and I sure hope it'll go for a little ways yet.
Are we there?
I think.